Welcome to the C Word, the Conservatives podcast. Today we're talking about taking a stand. I'm Jenny Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in South Yorkshire.
I'm Kloe Ramsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
Woohoo! Welcome back to Season 3, people.
So we have a bit of news about the C Word. Christina, our lovely Christina, is taking a holiday from the C Word for Season 3, basically because she has
so much on.
A job, a family, and 100 different extracurricular activity type things that she does.
Anyone who knows Christina knows that she keeps very busy. So, you know, she's on hiatus this season, but we're hoping we can welcome her back for Season 4. However, this means that we have loads of exciting guest hosts planned, and basically I'm quite excited. It's going to be
lots
great.
of different voices, lots of different viewpoints. It's going to be very exciting. And we have our first one with us now. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Jenny van Enckevort, and I'm Senior Conservator at the People's History Museum.
Hello, Jenny.
Welcome. Thank you for speaking to the C Word.
Yeah. And it's a very apt co-host to have, isn't it? Because we are talking about all kind of matters political today. And like, we've got this kind of wonderful topic that I feel there's so much to say about, really. It's hard to know where to start, to be honest.
It's a very timely episode to have, I think, because though I think for some people, politics and museums is a sort of everyday thing. And even politics is part of their everyday lives anyway, if you're very sort of in the know about current affairs. But for others, it will be news to them that this year is the centenary of the Representation of the People's Act, 1918, and this essentially has sparked loads of suffragette exhibitions. It's a very complex subject, but
it's very now.
It's very now. Yes, the centenary date was February the 6th, and the centenary is sort of switched on the concepts of political activism in museums, I think, and the importance of collections related to political events. So everyone's sort of getting keyed in and excited and interested.
Not just that. I mean, this is a kind of an amazingly timely centenary on the basis that, you know, there's like a revival of feminism and protesting and women's rights in America, for example. There's a lot of, you know, the pink hat movement, all that stuff, right? So it's actually, you know, a really kind of well-timed time to think about things like feminism and political activism and how we collect these things and how we look after them. And it's it's kind of
basically what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Oh, don't spoilers.
Yeah.
Ooh, I'll just jump in with this. We're not really doing a news section because we were a bit thin on news this time. But I did see something recently that pleased me, and that is that there's an LGBTQ plus museum being planned in London. It's been announced that it's something that's going to open in a couple of years. I'm not sure on the timeline, but it's been announced that they're collecting stories and objects and all that stuff. And that's kind of, you know, vaguely tangential to this. That,
yeah,
you know,
really interesting, sort of especially with representation in museums, definitely. I wonder, is the People's History Museum going to be involved in that, do you think?
So we do have a exhibition which is opening in June. Ooh. And it's called Represent. So it's not just like Suffragette the exhibition, which kind of a lot of people might expect from us, but it's going to be looking at how people are represented. And we've actually asked for people to kind of submit their ideas, and that could be an object or it could be a kind of group of things, and then that might end up in the exhibition. So it's not community curated in a way, but it's kind of drawing on different people's perspectives to kind of get an idea about how people feel represented in today's culture, and kind of looking back at the representation of the People Act as well, and kind of a timeline of how we got to where we are, basically. So it's really exciting to be involved with, and there's lots of different types of objects that we're going to be looking at. So, yeah, it's going to be
that sounds exciting.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But there are loads of, it's one of the things everyone's doing at the moment, isn't it? There's quite a few different exhibitions on this topic, as we mentioned just now. So there's obviously the Represent that you were talking about just now, Jenny. The Museum of London has got one on as well. Houses of Parliament, Abbey House Museum, and to name just a few, of course.
Are these suffragette specific? Or just kind of...
women's rights. They tend to be called things like Votes for Women and Deeds Not Words, that sort of thing. something.
Oh, yeah.
A Woman's Place was another one. I think that one's in Abbey House. And then also the National Trust is holding several events over the year, generally called Women and Power. And that's obviously just a few of the different events that are going on this year.
If you know of any other ones, we would love to hear about them. You can, tweet us and we'll retweet and all that stuff, right? So if you know of any other events or exhibitions going on about that, let us know. We'd love to hear about them.
Tell us about your event.
Yeah, do it. Now, basically, this stuff is like social history with a twist. I feel like we haven't talked a lot about social history, really. Not as a topic, but I suppose this is social history with almost more defined purpose. So when I think social history museum, I think tin cans and people's teapots and it's
this was my auntie's top. Do you want it?
Yeah, and like a lot of chairs. That's kind of what I think. So I'm thinking of what's in our social history store, and I'm like, it's a lot of butter churners and a penny farthing.
You've got a penny farthing?
Oh yeah, it's very rusty. And all sorts of exciting daily things. But this is kind of social history with a kind of a very niche, kind of inclination where it's very much about women's stories, suffragette movements, political ideals. It's really interesting stuff. And yeah, I like that it's highlighted. And it's making social history even sexier. No, social history is sexy. It's not all teapots. I'm just going to say that. It's not all teapots.
How does it compare, Jenny, with the collection of the People's History Museum?
Well, I mean, our collection is basically about everyday working people, and kind of that is our kind of form of social history, I guess. So it's normal people's history. Yeah. I guess that's how you could put it. And I think that's what makes our collection quite interesting, because it's kind of, I was listening to something recently by David Fleming at the National Museums Liverpool, and he's kind of done a lot of work about making museums more diverse and inclusive. And I think we're doing that already, really. And he's talking also about museums needing to be emotional places. And I think that's definitely what we do. And we kind of, it's very, like you say, it's very sort of current, and it's not difficult to be that way if that's the way that you're thinking all the time anyway.
Yeah.
So there's still bicycles and teapots and stuff, but they've got sort of strange slogans printed on them, and were used to cycle to a particular.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. But yeah, it's all sorts of stuff. Yeah. The collection does have a lot of kind of union stuff in general, to do with the kind of, which is part of the early part of the museum. So we used to be the National Museum of Labour History. So the early collections are quite labour specific, but then things have changed over time. So it's kind of, hopefully now a bit more kind of whole, more sort of rounded, really.
Yeah, it's broader now.
We do consider ourselves as social history, but we don't have typical social history collections in a sense, really. Yeah.
So that what you just said about creating a more diverse political collection, I'm really interested in that, because that means, I suppose, that you'd be collecting stuff from loads of different political viewpoints, and potentially even collections that may be considered offensive.
If you think about it, just politics will always be offensive to someone. It's always going to offend someone because it's something they don't agree with. So ultimately, if you have a political collection, it's always going to, rub someone the wrong way. But I guess if you have a diverse one, then everyone can feel represented even within their collection. Yeah. And I guess that's one of those things that, that's what makes a good collection. It represents everyone. Even if maybe you as a curator or a visitor might not necessarily think that, all of it is particularly nice. It's not really about it being nice, is it?
No. That's a bit of a challenge, isn't it, really, in display, to how to generate a sort of mixed or diverse viewpoint, a fair, unbiased viewpoint, without sort of offending anyone or something.
Oh, but can we be unbiased? Can anyone?
Can we?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I think people come to the People's History Museum having an idea about what they're going to find.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the majority of our visitors do have a certain political leaning, and there's no really getting away from that. But we do try to sort of represent different views, I think. And we have had discussions in acquisitions meetings about whether or not we should be collecting more right-wing material. And it's not really about kind of presenting balanced views, but kind of it's finding that balance between not going against the values of, or upsetting those people that we're trying to work with and kind of that we value working with as a museum, but also try to explain better why people had to campaign with what they're fighting for. So I think it does, there is a reason for kind of having that material, because it shows why, if it's something that's very strong and it kind of provokes that reaction in the visitor, then they can understand why people would campaign against it. So I think it is useful to have that. And what's interesting is maybe kind of what that would provoke in the visitors as well, whether you would end up getting instances of kind of graffiti or kind of vandalism if you were kind of displaying objects that were particularly controversial. I don't know if anybody's got any examples of that kind of thing happening. But
yeah, I'm really interested. That's actually one of my Chloe's questions page of things that I've written down as discussion points. The issue of vandalism. Have you experienced any vandalism yourself?
We do have one banner which I was looking up earlier on, which was vandalised in 2014, and it's a Scotland versus Chile banner. So it's actually to do with the in June 1997 there's a controversial football match between Scotland and Chile in the stadium where basically when there was a political coup when Pinochet overthrew the government, and in the stadium where some of those political prisoners, I guess you could call them, were being held, that match took place. So there was a lot of, before the match actually took place, there were a lot of protests about it or against it. And this banner is one of those banners that was used in protests. And in 2014, we actually had somebody graffiti the banner with a biro pen. But the weird thing is, it wasn't really related to the political message of the banner, because they've basically written on it, I had to write it down because I couldn't remember what it was. So Liverpool FC for the 2014 Barclays Premiership, discuss underlined. So it has nothing
So it's both quite verbose and specific, but also not really related to the banner at all.
Basically just to do with football. They thought, football, right, I'll write something about Liverpool FC on that.
Well, people do get very, worked up about football. Yeah.
I love of all of the different issues expressed by the banners and people's history. The one that really incited rage was one about football.
Yeah.
I mean, because I was sort of thinking about if you had graffiti on a very political object with politically specific graffiti, then you might have those issues about ethical issues about whether or not you should remove that graffiti, because it kind of becomes part of an object.
Yeah, that's true.
But in this case, it has nothing to do with that. I think they were justified in removing it. And I wasn't actually at the museum at the time, but my predecessor did actually remove it with a bit of IMS after testing the paint, of course, to make sure that it was safe to do. And we have got photographs of it beforehand, so we know what
it's documented.
But yeah.
So IMS removes biro, everybody. That's really. So my vandalism example is one of these things where everyone said it was probably vandalism, but it could have just been an accident or sort of random kind of destruction that happens occasionally in museums. While I was working at the Museum of Science and Industry, they had on display one of the Japanese kamikaze suicide planes, which obviously is a very, very evocative type of object. It's just really sad, basically, isn't it? And there was the end of this. It looked to me like it was a sort of slightly restored area of the plane. It wasn't a sort of metal end to it. It was a covered textile and then painted, and it was that painted textile that had been punched through and looked as though it had been, as everyone felt, slashed with a knife or something. And that was an interesting topic because obviously, is this vandalism? We think probably. And then the curators had to ask themselves, do we remove it? Do we cover the area? Do we state that this is what happened and create a conversation about it? In fact, conversation wasn't sort of the biggest issue at that point there, which I think might be different in other museums. It was mainly just, do we scoot it back so you can't reach it?
Okay. So no, but it's such a good example, because if it is someone's genuine reaction to the object, then do you respect that and leave it because that tells the story in and of itself? But then do you also encourage other people to have a similar violent reaction towards a museum object?
Yeah.
That's not something you want to encourage.
No.
Because everyone's allowed a reaction, but preferably don't,
I suppose it depends on context as well, because I suppose that particularly sort of political or radical museums, that's the context of it. Reaction is the context.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're going to a museum of industry and machines, essentially, you want to see, you're going there to look at all the interesting machines.
Yeah.
Rather than it's feeling sort of...
Yeah, it's more educational than emotional, maybe.
Yeah. Rather than being sort of politically challenged about it. But that's my example.
Yeah.
What do we do as conservators if we are faced with, presented with an object that we're offended by?
Ooh. I think I'm a difficult person to offend. That was my first caveat.
I feel like I'm constantly offended by everything around me.
I feel like I take a very relaxed standpoint in life.
Yes.
Or maybe I've just not encountered the type of object that I think you encounter in your daily life, for example. I mean, I don't think mine are particularly politically charged, for example.
Yeah.
So nothing has necessarily offended my point of view. I would still work on it, obviously. You know, it would...
Yeah, I think that's what I would do as well.
I don't think there would ever be an object in front of me that I said, I'm not working on that. Because... ultimately, everything is worth preserving.
Yeah.
Even things that are challenging to me, they're still important to someone.
Yeah.
You know, it's
you apply the same ethics that you would to an object.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
really
that is it, isn't it? That's the baseline. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe I'd be even more challenging of my own treatment choices to make sure that I'm really doing it right. I'm not doing this because I'm being a bit harsher on this object because I don't like it. You know,
I don't need to clean it.
maybe I would examine my own methods even more closely just to make sure that I'm being just as good to that object as all other objects if I found a challenging one.
How about you? What's your feeling on that?
I'd agree. I mean, I can't think of a specific example of something I've worked on that has challenged me in that way, I have to say. But it's not to say that it won't happen in the future if we do end up collecting stuff that is kind of a bit more challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could go with... It's the same kind of thing that you might put towards objects that are kind of... other people might be offended by, sort of like I know in previous episodes that you've talked about kind of human remains and that kind of thing. I guess it's a similar sort of issue, isn't it?
Yeah. That you just have to sort of have a think about it. I suppose it's more of a problem if you're the sole conservator at an institution and you essentially just don't really have a choice. But if you're part of a group, you could say, I don't actually fancy this one. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I can see how there would be occasions when there would be like a very clear conflict of interest almost. Like, say you're a Muslim conservator being asked to look at, you know, for example, anti-Islam propaganda leaflets. Yeah. I mean, how would you feel about that? I would feel extremely violated, you know, like looking at that because it's so against, you know, it becomes
sort of
more
direct.
personal.
Yeah, it's directly affected.
But then I haven't been in that position.
But that's really interesting, I think. Sorry to interrupt you, Jenny, but that one of the points that I was thinking about was kind of like diversity within conservation. And I think if the conservators within the profession aren't represented in that, then you know, maybe I don't know. I'm trying to get this out properly now.
That's all right.
I think see.
The more diverse the conservation profession is, the more interesting those kind of conversations will be. But I think, you know, we're not a very diverse group as we sit here.
We're not there yet. Yeah, we're not there yet.
No.
We're not. We're a work in progress. We are as a profession. The efforts that we're making to increase that is a whole different conversation, really, isn't it? But I was trying to think of what I would find offensive and whether I have found anything offensive in the past. And obviously you go to, all right, so would I be offended if I was presented with something related to an awful act of terrorism, or I think a slave collar, or something historical that's really just nasty. And I think the only thing that I've sort of worked on that kind of got to me on a kind of level was 1990s abortion equipment.
medical, and this was when I was working with a medicine collection. And I'm not opposed to abortion as a medical practice. I don't have sort of pro-life in that respect, but it was more just kind of the I suppose in a way yuck factor of this is horrible.
This has been used.
Yeah. Well, I don't know actually if it had been.
Yeah, fair
but because I think they're just automatically disposed of, aren't they?
Sure. I suppose.
I don't know.
I don't know anything about this.
No, I don't know anything about this. But that was the only thing that I could think of. And there were a few things childbirth related in that collection that got to me on a sort of more physical, oh God, this is horrible kind of way. But it wasn't a political or ethical.
That's more of a human reaction, though, isn't it?
I was just going to say that it's a human thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and ultimately all conservatives are human.
Yeah, even though we're all white women.
so we are allowed to go, ugh. Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's okay. I was just going to say that it's interesting that we've talked about difficult objects, because how about things that are actively collected that are difficult objects? I mean, contemporary collecting from protests and what's going on in the world now, that's a very now topic. Museums are going out there and they are collecting these things from the protests that are going on and riots and everything. And they are collecting these things and displaying them, which is, good, because we need to have these conversations and we need to save these things. But I saw something recently that actually sparked a bit of conversation between myself and a colleague. And that was that an exhibition in Brussels in January said that they were displaying clothes from rape victims.
Oh, I heard about that exhibition.
Which was a way of trying to de-shame victims, if you see what I mean, where it's like, look, you can wear anything and it can happen. So like, let's not make it a thing of,
asking for it. Yeah.
None of that, right? So it was a very important exhibition. But of course, that's a tremendously difficult thing to be collecting and displaying. And I mean, that must also raise challenges for conservators working on them. Like this is something very emotionally charged, something very recent. These people are still alive and well. And, they are, sharing something incredibly personal and stuff like that, which, I thought was interesting. And it made me and a colleague talk about what we collect and what we don't collect in our museum, for example. Because we don't collect difficult stories.
No, I suppose there's
the question is why? Why don't we? There are difficult stories, plenty of them. So why don't we encourage people to share them? Is it that we're shy? Is it that we're not quite sure how to handle it appropriately? Is that but it's like what is it? Is it a fear of offending people by asking for really personal things? But at the same time, we know people give really personal things to museums. So is it that we're not sure how to approach it? Is it that the topic is difficult and we're all trying to not talk about it?
Because then want to ask.
Because then should we talk about it?
Yeah.
I just thought it was an interesting thing that these things are being collected and displayed and should we or shouldn't we, and how does that affect us? I suppose in some ways it will also be like a mental health issue for like museum staff, because ultimately it might be a huge trigger to some staff members and stuff like that. So, which I guess is something else we're not really bearing in mind, I suppose. But it's all these questions, and I just thought they were interesting and just wanted to put them out there. And people can have opinions, and they can tweet at me all they want about it. No,
please tweet.
Because I encourage opinions. I just want to put it out there because I thought it was an interesting concept for an exhibition and a healthy one.
Yeah,
actually.
really interesting, really powerful.
Yeah. Kind of hard to move on from, though.
We've been talking about recently having more of a sort of rapid response collecting policy, because we have got placards that were collected at the Women's March in Manchester that happened last year.
January 2017, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we do have one of them on display at the moment, which is an amazing cartoon of Donald Trump, which basically he's depicted like a Neanderthal dragging a woman along the floor as if it's a kind of club. Which is it's a really simple placard, but it's kind of quite a strong image. And it's one that one of a few that were collected at the time, and I think they were just discarded in the street, and we were able to collect them because somebody brought them in to us, so we didn't have kind of, they weren't sort of donated in a traditional sense. They were sort of collected by somebody who thought we would be interested in them, which is fantastic. And that's kind of sparked off debate about whether we should have kind of something set in place to respond more rapidly to things like this, and whether we should have people present at certain marches to sort of look out for stuff and approach people and say,
really interesting.
Yeah, it's not something we've kind of implemented yet, but it's something we've been talking about, definitely.
All of this is making me think, is anyone collecting stuff from the UCU strikes, the University and College Union?
Probably.
I hope so.
Maybe not, actually.
Yeah, because that's right. So at the time of recording, that's kind of tail end of going on, and that's, affecting university museums and obviously university courses and stuff like that. So there's a lot of strikes going on because pensions. Yeah. I wonder if people are collecting things.
I hope so. Facebook tells me that I think Jane Henderson, her very self, has been on similar marches alongside Phil Parkes. So Jane and Phil, if you've actually got some interesting,
collect some stuff.
contemporary protest material, then please share it with us, because that would be really nice. I don't know about museum collecting. I don't know, maybe if museums in Cardiff would be interested in that sort of thing. But then that's another issue, isn't it? Are museums interested in this material?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously the People's History Museum is very interested, but
it's where you draw the line, though, I think.
Of course, yeah.
You could collect everything, and it's kind of having. I think a lot of the time we're having discussions about where we do want to collect. Kind of, you have to sort of draw the line somewhere, don't you?
There's legality issues of collecting stuff off the street as well, isn't there?
I would suspect so, because, I mean, if it's, for example, if someone is collecting something that they found discarded in the street, then sure, it does seem like the original creator didn't want to keep that. But at the same time, it isn't necessarily theirs to hand in, I guess.
Yeah.
It's finders keepers. Is that how it works? It's really interesting. If someone knows, I'd love to know, because I don't know how that works.
Finders keepers. Yeah, if there's a political collections registrar out there.
Yeah. No, I'm so curious now. Obviously you can do it, but are there implications of it? I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Or is it just anonymous artwork, essentially?
Yeah, I suppose I have two feelings about that. Hang on, do I? What was I saying?
Is it orphaned works?
Orphan? Aww.
No, that's a real term in copyright. Yes, that's a real thing in intellectual property.
Do you know about copyright law?
Yeah, that's because my other half is really into that sort of thing, right? So I
my God,
I get to hear about this stuff.
So you kind of have to be into it as well.
Yeah. Well, no, it's more like it's infected me. So now I'm like, ooh, I wonder what the implications of this are. But yeah, I wonder if they are orphan works like that, because they're not claimed as such.
Yeah. I suppose the conservator me says, please just ask people, like the idea of attending protests that you mentioned, Jenny, is really interesting, because not only is it really nice to then you could discuss sort of where it came from and when an object was made, collect photographs, or even manufacturing information about it, blah 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 blah. But also, it sounds like you could get something that's a hell of a lot less damaged than one that's been discarded in the street.
Yeah, but even so, let's be fair. Some of these things are not meant to last. People make them.
Well, that's for damn sure. They're all made of bloody plastic.
But I'm thinking, signs that you're holding up in a demonstration might have been made of anything lying around your house. And I sure as heck don't keep, acid-free sign-making material.
Why not?
In case of an emergency. I have cardboard.
We have a cardboard sign. Is one of the placards that was collected, and it's just basically daubed with house paint by the looks of it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's
I think it's held together with gaffer tape as well.
Oh, is it? I was about to say, well, that's okay. At least there's no paint, there's no tape on it. Damn it.
Nope.
Yeah. Pretty much everything that you don't want on an object.
But isn't that the nature of political activism, though? Like, it needs to be immediate, it needs to be now, so we're making it with whatever we have at hand.
It needs to piss off conservatives. But there's issues, isn't there, with even materials that are technically stable, just having been used so much. So
they're very active items. They have properly been used.
But that's interesting because it's the use life that you can see in it, isn't it? They're falling apart because they were used all the time, not because they were used.
There is something to be said about something that does look like it has been used as well. Yeah. The longevity of the objects will definitely vary incredibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Are we thinking about this sort of material as in the same respect as ethnographic material in that case? If we're talking about underrepresented minority groups, repressed groups, given a voice, is it sort of this kind of political social history? Basically like the sort of the cultural heritage of us almost, of different groups in our society, rather than, stuff that's essentially been stolen 200 years ago. And now those groups would quite like that stuff back, please. We've got different issues because there's not necessarily the repatriation issue, but it's the same kind of emotionally charged ownership, the issue of ownership by different groups that, I mean, let's face it, unless we are specifically talking about votes for women, most conservators won't be part of the minority groups because we are nearly all straight white women.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we're looking at very different things here because, okay, so for example, women's marches and stuff like that, then obviously that's half of the global population. Ignoring entirely that is most of conservatives, then it's a representation that should be made, and sometimes women's history is appallingly represented in museums,
vastly appallingly.
So to be honest, I just welcome more of that. But for some of these, it'll be much smaller groups and much smaller sections, but it can mean so much because there are all sorts of things you can collect. Because I'm thinking we've got stuff for miners' strikes, for example. So that's we've got. I once found a locker door with things like traitor and stuff written on it because it was someone who wasn't striking.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and
is that in your collection now?
Yeah, so I mean that sort of stuff is so important to keep. It's a dramatic story and clearly traumatic for whoever had the locker, and that's an emotionally charged object. But it's such a vital thing to keep. But I mean, that arguably that comes from a small group of people. That's the group of miners who worked in the mines, and ultimately, people in South Yorkshire and in many other places like Wales, they would have had families and communities who can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it can mean something to anyone who sees it. It can have an emotional impact on anyone. But it's
I think it's definitely the case for kind of LGBT plus material, and that's something that we've been looking at in the past few years as well, because we had another exhibition called Never Going Underground, and that was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of partial decriminalisation of homosexual acts. And that was a community curated exhibition, and it was really highlighted the fact that we have very little, or we did have very little material in the museum to do with LGBT rights and history, and I think actually working with those communities made us realise that that's the power in it is having actually contact with those people and actually having those conversations with the people who it's affecting. So it really is about those same ethics, I think.
And it's about kind of story, isn't it? The memories.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly kind of marginalised groups, even within those kind of communities as well, like kind of trans people and how underrepresented they are within communities, and it's sort of it raises a whole load of questions. Once you have that material in a museum, you think about things in a different way. You think about how you present in those objects, how you talk about those objects, how you expect your visitors or you want your visitors to react to those things as well. There's loads of different questions.
Do you find that you look at things differently as a conservator? Have you discussed with minority groups about your conservation work and how it would differ? Or do you feel that, I suppose, the action of conservation is fairly kind of respectful to the object anyway?
Yeah, I think it is anyway, but it does make you think, because that's not my history. I think I feel more connected to the objects and have more respect and emotion towards them, because once you know the story, you can identify with them more, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like anybody telling you the story of an object. If it's a cup sitting on a table, it doesn't mean anything. But when you know it's, you know, who it belonged to and what the story is behind it, you see it in a completely different light. It's the same thing, isn't it, as anything else?
Yeah. I have to say, without being specific, my change in job has definitely changed my attitude to object stories, because at the previous place of work, I wasn't that kind of interested. I mean, I was interested in the objects, but I was interested mainly in the materials and how their action affected the condition. But now I'm much more kind of really keyed in with the object story and what it is and when it was made and what it, you know.
This is interesting because, okay, so I just want to make a point now that I feel like a lot of conservators are very material based. And that's sometimes because we're forced to be. Nobody gives us the story. Sometimes we don't even have access to the records about the object that we have. Yeah. And that can be kind of alienating as a conservator because you're just working on this disembodied thing. Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of those things that I didn't expect, because I feel like as university students, for example, we were expected to do a lot of research and try to find things out. And sometimes it was impossible because there was no story and there was no paperwork, and the museum, you know, we found this in store. We don't really know what it is, but it has a number. It really varied what kind of thing you had in front of you. But you were allowed to do a lot of research, so you could actually find out quite a lot about the general type of object, for example, and that will give you a lot of perspective. And then you go out and work in life, and depending on where you end up, that is not the case.
It's so rare to have the time, isn't it?
It's rare to have the time. It's rare to have the information. It's rare people think the information is relevant to you at all, because I just want this done. It doesn't matter what it is, because they know the story, but they're not really willing to share it with you, which is an interesting notion that curators kind of often hold the power, and then they don't communicate anything really to the conservator about what it is that they're working on, because they just think that you're a material scientist only interested in that. And that's totally a valid way to be as well, be in work. But I love learning about the objects. I love learning the stories. And if I could, I would learn everything about an object as I was working on it. But, you know.
It's central as well, isn't it? Because, I mean, in the same way as with ethnographic material, that you've got an object and it has a mark on it, and how do you know if you know the story of the sort of, I suppose, the cultural heritage of that object from an ethnographic point of view, you know not to remove that mark because it's there for these reasons. And in the same way, social history object is, you know, that it's maybe a sign of use or a sign of modification or whatever. So knowing that is going to be so important. And I imagine it's the same with politically charged objects.
Yeah, definitely. The Manchester Suffragette banner that we've actually got in the collection was recently acquired. That has got handling damage on the sides of it, which, you know, you wouldn't want to remove. It's part of the object. And everybody who I've spoken to about that piece has seen that and just been like, you can see their eyes light up. And it's I think with the social history, it's a really good way for conservators to communicate their work, because people can identify with it. And that's not always the case for kind of beautiful art objects that kind of have a everyone can appreciate their pretty things. But what do they mean to people? You know. That's why I love social history, because it's kind of, it's got a power to it that you don't get from just kind of beautiful art objects. You know.
Yay, social history!
Social history rules.
That's staying in the episode.
So another object that we've kind of, I'd say recently acquired, it's been with us for a couple of years, but we haven't displayed it yet, is the Joe Cox Memorial Wall, which was actually it's kind of, how to describe it, it's, I believe, 4 or 5 panels of basically pieces of wood with 2x4 kind of structures, and it's been painted white, and it has signatures all over it, and it's you know, you class it as an ephemeral object in that sense. But it was basically erected outside the House of Parliament shortly after the death of MP Joe Cox in 2016. So it happened, I'm sure everyone will know, during the Brexit campaign, and it was the first time that a MP serving British MP have been murdered since 1990. So it was a kind of a politically a really significant moment, but also really sort of emotional. And basically the wood was kind of left kind of outside for people to kind of both nationally and internationally to kind of write their thoughts, and like a book of condolence, but in kind of 3D form. And it is a really interesting object. It's got, pen, it's got a sort of marker pen, biro pen, somebody's written on it with lipstick. It's got all sorts of kind of materials on there. And I think when it first was kind of brought to the acquisitions meeting, I was really skeptical about it, because I was like, this thing sounds huge. What am I going to do with it?
Where I'm going to put it.
Oh no, but everybody was really passionate and interested in it, and it ended up that we did collect it, and at the moment it's in the store, and it is structurally it's fine actually. It has got a little bit of kind of damp and kind of curling at the corners just from kind of being outside, but on the whole it's not too bad. It's going to be a challenge to conserve it because we want to kind of retain what's there, and I think it's going to be more on the documentation of it really than actually kind of, it doesn't have any, at the moment we haven't noticed any sort of really specific conservation problems with it, but that might come as we investigate it further. So it's going to be conserved as part of an EU project, which it's EU funded. I don't have the full details of that yet because it's still kind of early days, but I think it's going to be a really interesting one in terms of how we decide to display it, kind of what people think about it. Kind of, I'm really interested to kind of talk to the community groups that are going to be getting involved in the project about how they see the conservation, and kind of try and get a bit more kind of community involvement in that process, because that's not something done really at the museum before, is kind of like get opinions from the start about how we want to treat objects and how people perceive that process. I think that would be really interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah, what an object to have.
I've not heard of that ever been done before anywhere. And if anyone listening knows of a sort of community involvement in the process of conservation, that would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
Such a fascinating
I'm not saying to like get people in kind of working on it, but it's more like have those discussions about how we treat it really. Yeah.
I was just going to mention a couple of things that are more for museum workers, more for the museum professionals, because now we've obviously talked a lot about collecting and people bringing in political objects. But what if museum staff wants to be more politically involved and stuff like that? It's interesting. There aren't really any good unions for us to begin with, unless you work in very specific environments like a university museum. Then there's that kind of group of unions to look at. I'm also thinking of people getting involved with things like, I'm calling it a campaign, but I'm not sure it's actually a campaign or if it's just kind of a loose movement. But that museums are not neutral discussion that's going on all the time about how we should be political, we should take a stance, it's okay to have opinions, museums can have opinions, that all of that is okay. I find that so interesting, and I'd love to hear from people who are trying to engage with that in that sort of way as professionals. Because and whole museums who are trying to do it, because it's an interesting little fairy tale that we have, that we're all above politics somehow. Obviously, it will depend on the kind of museum you are. I feel like in a local authority setting, you're certainly not allowed to be political because, you're a local authority and the local authority is run by whoever won and stuff like that, right? So that's perhaps a trickier thing. But
it's that don't talk about politics at the dinner table thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but
you try and keep it away.
That doesn't apply in a museum.
No, exactly.
That's not the dinner table. So I'm heartened to see this kind of discussion going on, and also things like.
But it's so much about funding, though, isn't it? And about sponsorship, and not offending the people who are.
So like, don't bite the hand that feeds you, etc. But then does that just ultimately mean that you're in someone's pocket? Does that mean that someone's bought the museum?
It's God, that got deep. Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
big and important questions. Yeah, they are. But people are for example, upsetting sponsors and stuff like that. I can't remember who it was who had exhibition sponsored by BP, the oil company.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and there was a big upset. It wasn't that recent? It's recent-ish, but I can't really remember entirely when. But
something to research for the show notes.
Yeah, well, quite. And
that didn't mean to sound so pointed. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Point taken. But I remember there being a lot of upset about this, and people saying that, well, art shouldn't be sponsored by oil companies. What's up about? What's up with that? And then similar, there's just been this great fallout that BAE, which is a kind of weapons manufacturer essentially, has pulled out as the Great North exhibition sponsor because people were very upset that arms dealers were kind of sponsoring
I see
museum work, which and these things are contentious, but then at the same time, it's hard because people look for funding in all sorts of places. And then Ken Berger-Spitz says, should we take ethical standpoints? It's kind of a can of worms that I'm enjoying opening and leaving to fester. There you go, people.
Can we revisit it for the funding episode shortly in this season?
Yes, we can. That's a good point. Quick shout out to things like Museum Detox, which is trying to get more ethnic minorities into museums and stuff like that.
Real.
That's also a kind of political movement
Absolutely.
in the museum sector, which is totally awesome because we do need to diversify. None of this bollocks where we're all white women.
Do we remove stuff that's offensive, or do we just think about that in the sort of curation of having things behind walls that aren't immediately accessed? I've been to exhibitions before where there have been signs that both at the front of the exhibition saying this contains potentially offensive material, or behind it at a wall partition that says this contains scenes of a sexual nature kind of thing.
That. Yeah, we've had that definitely where a community exhibition it was sexually explicit material, so it was to protect younger members of the museum visitors basically, and families who didn't want people to be viewing that. So I think that's a good way of doing it, because it's not taking it off display, but it's still giving people the choice if they don't want to.
I agree. I think that's the middle of the road. That's the best you can do, because I don't think we should be hiding things.
No.
Preferably we shouldn't be hiding anything. I mean, if the museum has it, it's got to be something that you can show people, arguably.
Yeah, and I suppose if the whole purpose of an exhibition or of the museum at all is to give a voice to minority groups and give a voice to people who don't have a voice or don't have who need more of a voice, to then say you can't display that. Or I don't want that to see that is a bit sort of, that in itself is.
I think we need to embrace uncomfortable items. Like not all objects are happy objects. And we already do that. We have, museums dedicated to, warfare.
Yeah.
We already know that we can handle difficult discussions. So let's not shy away from it when it's political.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a fabulous discussion.
I agree.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jenny.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hello listeners, today I'm with the lovely Helen Antrobus, curator of the People's History Museum 2018 and the Suffragette exhibition. Welcome Helen, please tell us a little about the exhibition you're working on and why my statement was incorrect.
So this year, our programmed year of exhibitions and events is called Represent Voices 100 Years On, and it's exploring two timelines really. It's 100 years since the Representation of the People Act and all men and some women won the vote, but it's also looking at contemporary voting and campaigning today, and kind of looking at how far we've come and how far we've got to go. We kind of came to this curatorial idea of marrying two timelines when we realised we didn't want to do Suffragette the exhibition. It's a narrative that's been retold. It's a very public history element, and actually there is so much more to gender history, equality and feminism that we need to be using this year to have those conversations. So it was really setting a challenge to ourselves to address the issues that are going on today that actually were happening 100 years ago as well.
So how has this worked then? It sounds like such a vast and complex story. How have you focused your mind? Did you have elements and themes in mind before you began?
So considering my specialism was in women's history, I definitely went in with an agenda, I think is fair to say. I definitely went in wanting to look really, really compare and very kind of explicitly compare 1918 to 2018. However, we did have a co-curation element to this, where we worked with the community and engaged community voices in what they wanted to see. So we were guided by that, and they did really form what we wanted to look at and explore within the exhibition. But I think coming at it from a curatorial role, I definitely went in there wanting to look at marginalised communities, underrepresented groups, and actually ask quite tough and challenging questions. I also went in there with an idea that I wanted the exhibition to be made up of at least 80% our own collection, because PHM have had this thing in the past where we tell amazing stories, but not always with our own collections. So I really wanted to explore how we would use and how we could interpret what we already had. And we had this really rich collection of women's history objects. We had in our archive and in the collections rooms in our off-site stores, there were loads of stories waiting to be explored. And I really went in there thinking, this is the exhibition where we use those stories to tell the stories of today and to compare and contrast them with the stories of today.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but have you had any disagreements along the way? Any politically charged dissent in the ranks?
I don't think it's a difficult question. I think when you're working in a team, the great thing about PHM is that we are a good team and we work with a very politically charged subject, which we're all really passionate about. So I think the good thing about this team is that we can be open with each other and say how we feel without it descending into kind of tensions. We definitely have different ways. I think not necessarily in the story that we wanted to tell, but maybe the way we all wanted to tell it, and especially with the kind of community engagement side of things. I think there's always going to be, it's an incredible thing to work with the community because this is their space, not ours, and we need to engage as many groups and as many voices as possible. But it's, I guess, coming at it from a history perspective, it's almost like, what stories do you prioritise telling, the past or the present? And for me, telling the stories of the past will truly inform and inspire and change the present. So it's all a matter of space as well. It's not just the visionary side of things. It's the actual kind of nitty gritty of it. And
where's
if we have this object, what's going to happen to that object? So I feel that there were kind of conversations and different opinions there, which I think is always going to be with such a vast subject, and a vast subject with so many different ways you could tell that story. But I think it was good that we all really agreed on, this isn't an exhibition about Emmeline Pankhurst. And the fact that we all went into that with that frame of mind, I think has really helped us overcome the challenges we've had as a team and externally through that. That was very diplomatic.
So it was diplomatic, so no kind of sassy stories about takedowns.
No, quite. I mean, being the kind of having the curatorial role, I think I will happily say this. I think it was really important to have a woman or anyone who identifies as a woman curating this exhibition, because I feel like that we had to have that voice on it. And I hope this exhibition does what it has done for me, which is really help me use my voice and be really aware of how worthy my voice is. And I really hope that what I've got from curating this exhibition will do the same for any woman or anyone coming to see this exhibition, which is your opinions and your voice is so valid. And I got that not through necessarily looking at the stories I was trying to curate, but through how I was trying to curate them. And I'm really certain that what I got from it, other people will have got from it too. And I think whatever tensions or communications come up within museum roles and within the process, which I'm sure every conservator and curator's experience, it's the validation at the end of what you've put together and knowing that is your achievement. I think it was important that a woman got to experience that with this topic. So I'm really pleased about that.
Moving away from the specifics of the exhibition, what does a powerful political object look like for you? What really gets to you on an emotional level?
I've seen so many objects. I mean, personally, the history I'm interested in is kind of early 20th century objects. When I see how much women overcame back then, for me, there will always be a huge amount of power and emotion within a political banner. Every banner that I see in this museum, which are so beautifully conserved, thanks to, you know, the team here, including yourself, every time I see one, it's like, you know, kind of someone squeezes your heart that this was carried with so much message and so much power. But for me, it's always the stories behind it, like the stories of who did this and who did that, and actually which woman. I mean, it's always female stories for me. I can be really open about that, but knowing the stories of the women who did those things really, for me, have a sense of quiet power, whether it's a banner being marched through the streets, whether it's a sash, whether it's a medal. All these things for me have true power. My favourite powerful political objects, I'm really interested in textiles and what people wore. And I think today we even, not just through self-identity but through political identity, I think we have so many charged messages in what we wear and how we wear things. And I think that's something that's happened throughout the past. So, for instance, I've recently been reading about a suffragette, Sophia Duleep Singh, who was an Indian princess who grew up in England, and she only ever really wore her sari and her traditional dress. She never ever wore it, only when she needed to kind of make a point. So when she was raising money for Indian soldiers in World War I, she would wear this sash. And I just think sort of those things are so powerful, but you don't really think about how powerful they are until you break it down. And even I always do it with the things I wear whenever I'm talking about, like, so the other day I was talking about Manchester suffragettes, and I realised I was wearing a green and purple outfit with my Manchester bee earrings in. And I realised that it is so symbolic. Everything I wore identified with this suffrage movement and with Manchester. Yeah. And you do it without thinking. You know, if you're from Manchester, you wear the bee because you're proud of where you come from. If you are, you know, into feminism and women's history, you often wear purple and green. And I think there's so much power in what you wear. So I guess to cut that down, I think it is fashion for me. Yeah. It's one of the most powerful political objects that we have in this collection, from sort of 20th century sashes to 21st century t-shirts.
Do you have an example of a really affecting moment that's changed the way you see things, really opened your eyes?
Yeah, so last year I was working on a project with Betty Tebbs, who was at the time a 98-year-old woman who had spent her whole life campaigning for not only women's equality but for peace as well. She was a big hero of Maxine Peake's, and she was always at every kind of big Manchester protest. You would see Betty Tebbs there in her kind of wheelchair and carrying her signs, and I had the absolute joy of meeting her and becoming her friend until she died last January. And she is probably one of the people who has the biggest impact on my life and the way I go about telling stories, because she really taught me it's the people you don't expect who have the most to tell and who have made the most change. And Betty Tebbs has never been splashed across national news. No, she never really made headlines until she died, actually. But this was a woman who has paved the way for young women, young Manchester women like myself, to fight for equal pay, to fight for equality. And it's the casualness of her activism. So when I went there, I was talking to her about Greenham Common, and she pointed to a lamp next to me, and there was a bit of the wire that she'd cut herself from the Greenham Common camp and wrapped it around her lamp. She had all these incredible souvenirs, which we would look at as museum objects. They peppered her home because they were part of her story. And I mean, as a curator, seeing objects like that in their original context and seeing the importance they have to one person is always incredible. But to see the change one woman has made and how her story, her unassuming, quiet story, will go on to impact so many more people, I guess really changed the way I looked at curating and contemporary collecting as well. Because it's stories like hers, and that, you know, we clear out our grandparents' homes and they go to charity shops and things, and actually there's so many stories there that, you know, they should be going to museums and they should be there to inform next generations. So yeah, Betty Tebbs, go and read about her, she's great.
Oh, lovely. Everyone do that. What makes a good radical or political museum or exhibition?
I think museum, it has to be that it is truly not a museum about campaigns, but a campaigning museum. we often talk about being a politically neutral museum, which we are. We don't support any political party. We're not affiliated to any political party. But I feel quite strongly that we don't shy away. I think I'm very much one for creating reaction and being controversial, and not always talking about, we help people find their voices, but recognise that every single person already has a voice.
Yeah.
And actually here just gives them a place to shout really, really loud about whatever they want to shout about. I think being very active in keeping up with contemporary fights, taking a stance on a lot of contemporary campaigns, things that we feel strongly about, that we feel need to be heard and represented. I think we need to do that. And I think it's, whilst I love looking back at the past is one of my favourite things to do in the world, but actually start to really talk about how they inform our future, and not just giving people a space to reminisce, but giving people a space to plot and to challenge and to change, I think, is my favourite thing. I want this place to be just one big virtual soapbox that people just can stand up on, and we are really holding people, putting people on our shoulders so they can change the city and the world that they live in. And that to me is really important, that we're not just hanging banners for people to like, we're encouraging people to bring out their own banners. That's what I want from a radical, politically active museum.
And finally, please use this opportunity to plug the museum exhibition and the programme for this year. I feel you've already done that really well.
I mean, Represent is going to be incredibly powerful.
When's it open?
It opens on the 2nd of June. It runs till 3rd of February. So you've got ages to come and see it. There is some absolutely beautiful, stunning and powerful objects in there. You will feel challenged, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you will come out wanting to make a change and wanting there to be an election so you can go and use your vote, the vote that so many people have fought for. There's also some incredible suffrage history as well. I couldn't not sneak that in there. So, it really is a chance for everyone who loves history, who loves campaigns, who wants to learn more about representation equality. This is the place to come and do it, and to celebrate what's happened, but also to challenge how we're going to move forward as well.
Thank you very much, Helen, for talking to the C Word.
Yeah, thank you for choosing to talk to me.
Dear the C Word, I'm not a conservator but a collections manager, but our worlds often converge in many ways. My question is, I'm doing condition reports for works of art on paper that have been displayed in historic homes, some for 40 years or more. They're being retired to storage. I felt, and this is how I proceeded, that the only way to accurately gauge their condition was to separate them from their frames. Part of me felt that it was almost sacrilegious. As a conservator, is this how you would proceed? Postscript, they are not going back in their frames. From Evelyn. Dear Evelyn, thank you for your incredibly thoughtful question. So, is it okay to take the paintings out of the frames? I think on the first way of looking at it is looking at the balancing act. What are the push and what are the pull factors? I would be looking as a conservator at the significance of the frames. Are the pictures in frames that are original to them or original to the house? Have they always been in those frames? Are they part of the aesthetic that the original curator made? On the other hand, things that would sort of argue against you keeping them would be perhaps the frames are damaging to the pictures. Perhaps the backings are acidic, they're distorted or damaged. Perhaps they're providing poor RH protection. You sometimes get that where there's a big crack or gap down the back of the frame. Sometimes there's things like sellotape holding them into the frames or masking tape. You would have a look at those things and balance them up. Another factor you should look at is how is the object described in the catalogue entry. Is it described as a picture or a framed picture? How was it collected? Or has it always just been there? These things should be considered and balanced up. For sure, if you're going to take pictures and put them into storage, it's going to be a better preservation strategy if they go into an excellent acid-free mount and acid-free box that's correctly sized on a shelf that the box carefully fits on. That's assuming that all you want to do is protect the image. If you separate the picture from the frame with the intention of putting them back together at some point in the future, I think that's a tad unlikely, and I think most of us know that separated pieces end up staying separated. So this is clearly a balancing act, and how do you decide? Well, you could look at something like the ICON Code of Practice or accreditation guidelines, but they're not going to tell you. The only place that you're really going to get advice is in the situation of accreditation and acquisition and disposal if the frames themselves are accessioned. So if the frames themselves are accessioned, I suggest that you have to work out a way to keep them. But you don't tell me that this is necessarily a museum. So that asks us about the question of whether this is necessarily accredited, whether it's simply just a picture in a frame. Do we have any duty of authenticity to the old? What indeed does authenticity actually mean? In military museums, they very often re-ribbon medals. Replacing worn parts in engines in industrial museums is quite common. And in contemporary art collections now, we're seeing examples of good practice where art is remade following a procedure. Just because it's old doesn't necessarily require it to be kept. I've just had a chimney pot taken off the roof of my house that's nearly 200 years old, and although I've kept a bit of it as a plant pot, I haven't kept the whole structure. If you look at the example of a church with pews in it, if you were to move those pews out of a part of the area in order to give the church a new life as a performance space, and the income from that helps preserve the building, then that's traditionally been considered an acceptable preservation strategy. So we clearly are able to consider the greater good of the main part as justifying alterations to parts of an object or a building. But I think what makes those decisions good or bad is how they're made. Are they thoughtful decisions made in consultation with the people who care? I think one of the things that we do in collections care too often is make medical analogies. And I think for your example, the medical analogy falls apart. Although in human care, we want and expect for each patient to be offered an equal standard of care, and we recognise the rights of people to health care, objects simply do not have these. So, if I have an old master and I want to sloop gel onto it and scrub it for clickbait, sadly, I think for most of us, I can. If I have an old master art painting and I want to paint Star Wars characters onto it, and it's mine, I can. It only exists if there's a separate protection for that object that is built in by people ascribing protections, that these things become a problem. If the building is listed, if the collections are designated. In these situations, the problem exists because the act of protection has been put in place. So I would say your decision depends on whether or not the frame has any actual designated protection. Is your collection an accredited museum? Is the frame listed in the catalogue? I can tell you that if you haven't discussed this issue with the owners, then I think it's a problem. I think if you've been disposing of the frames without considering it in detail, without thinking through your rationale, then that's a problem. But if the frames are not identified as part of the collections, if the images are going to be put into a well-preserving box, acid-free mounts, high-quality packaging, then you will be extending the life. And if that's done in conjunction with the owners or the managers, then it's probably fine. I think that what we know about the medical analogy and the rights analogy for objects is that the right doesn't exist within the object. The right exists much more within us as people and our having rights, or if we argue for them, rights to have access to our cultural heritage and identity. And this is such a big question, isn't it, at the moment when we see those rights under attack around the world. So really what we're looking at is, to what extent are we respecting the rights and needs of the people who care about these things? And I think that was how I would make my final decision. Thank you so much for your question, Evelyn. Over and out.
This time I will be reviewing Feminism and Museums, Intervention, Disruption and Change, Volume 1, edited by Jenna C. Ashton, from Museums, etc. This is a new collection of 29 essays from museums and galleries from all over the world, discussing and presenting the impact of feminism in different institutions and the ways that museums can be used as forums for the discussion and development of feminist issues to different audiences. I'll be giving an overview here as there's such a wealth of work, topics and projects. All I can achieve is an impression and an encouragement to you all to seek out a copy for your own work. It begins by introducing the issues and the roots of feminist theory, challenging the white male ownership of artistic judgment and historic storytelling, with the goals to raise awareness through education and public programming. After this, and a foreword from Maura Riley at the Centre for Feminist Art, the essays are grouped into 3 topics: theory and practice, founded on feminism, and artist intervention. Theory into practice explores the use of feminist theory and how it can be used to shape spaces and content. Now, in theoretical books, a section called Theory into Practice always causes alarm bells to ring for me as something opaque and confusing that I won't really understand. But here the first chapter is an interview with Amelia Jones, who in conversation discusses feminist curating, her artistic practice with feminism, and what that means to her and others in the world of contemporary art. The other chapters in the section also use the language of political and feminist theory to discuss very current issues in society all over the world, including the fight for citizenship and representation both inside the museum and out. Generally, this section explores issues of equality in museums, both curatorially and as a place of work for an increasingly female workforce. The following section, Founded on Feminism, is full of case studies of organisations that started specifically through feminism, equality and ideals of human rights. In women's museums, hubs for feminism, for example, Astrid Schoniger gets into the nitty-gritty of what a feminist museum is and how they began, presenting examples from all over the world. The following chapters detail different institutions of note, their journey and processes of operations, and we have voices from archivists, artists, midwives and sex workers. The latter I found very powerful indeed. There is so much power in this chapter, I really can't do it justice. Reading about the examples from first-hand accounts provides something that discussions of political theory somehow just can't. The final chapter, Artist Intervention, presents a huge number of projects from feminist artists that tackle the issues set out in the introduction of the work and bring in new audiences by changing methods of communication and interpretation. Many artworks involving interaction and performance move away from the mainstream conservation, but this and just collections use in research as part of the work all point to a change in how museum spaces are used that conservators will need to manage and possibly also mitigate. There are some instances in this work, unsurprisingly, when the language could be more accessible to the unfamiliar audience. For a collection of papers focused on developing the communication of feminist issues to new and different audiences, I could argue here that a great deal of the work that needs to be done in museums needs to start with getting museum professionals on board with this to begin with. On the other hand, the intro does a lot to present the issues of feminism and women's rights and equality, and those particularly unfamiliar won't pick up a book called Feminism and Museums anyway. For me, this is an exciting, hopeful and empowering read that will be an excellent springboard for new projects and for communicating the value of proposals to colleagues who have not maybe encountered this sort of work before. There's a huge variety in the type of writing as well, some highly theoretical and deep and academic, and others more accessible and anecdotal. Generally very enjoyable, but it will take me a long time to get through all of the works because there's just so much. Thank you very much. So if you're interested in purchasing a copy of this, it is available on the Museums Etc. website. Volume 1 out at the moment is £75 and Volume 2 I think is in the works at the moment. So nip onto that website and have a look.
Ooh, slight correction. Volume 2 of Feminism and Museums is out now. It has just come out and you can buy both Volume 1 and 2 as a bundle for £125, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes. And now for some comments, questions and corrections. While we've been off air, Stuart has written to us and he writes in, "My apologies if you already dealt with this issue, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on industries and jobs that are peripheral to the core work of conservation. Framing technology, 3D printing or whatever. Doubtless you're aware that this sector isn't exactly brimming with job opportunities, and that seems to be even more the case in Australia where he's from, so he thinks he's more likely to get a peripheral field job than a conservation job, and he'd be interested to hear our thoughts."
It's an interesting comment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to lie, there aren't loads of conservation jobs. There's only so many.
But it's a profession, isn't it? And it's often the position that people say, right, well, we need a conservator.
Yeah.
So let's get one, when actually you need three and some techs and some framers. And yeah. So, right. I think the problem here is actually the general funding of the museum sector is like really, really, really struggling right now. So, for example, if I'm say that we're putting on an exhibition, you know, I'm the conservator, there's collections people involved, but maybe we need something framed or we need a mount maker or something, and then we just told there's no money for that, so just make do with whatever you can make, you know, yourselves out of paper. You know, it's hard because while I want to say the jobs are there, sometimes they're just not, because there's not money to get anyone in to do those jobs either, and that's the hard one. But then I think there's freelance is a possibility here, because I think I've encountered in the past essentially freelance mount makers, freelance framers of collection material, and quite a lot that work because they know that no one keeps
a full-time
mounter on staff, however much they could really do with one.
And I mean, you are right, there are actually more peripheral jobs than we might be appreciating here, because there's an overall technician, for example, mount makers and framers, just like we said, but then it can even be museum photographers. People don't have that anymore.
No, that's rare, isn't it?
But if you can be a photographer for a digitization project where people put their database online, for example, and you have object handling experience because you have a conservation background, you will be a gold mine for whoever's doing that project. So, I mean, adjacent fields, there's certainly nothing wrong with going into them. And if you have a conservation knowledge, it might actually be your unique selling point for being a freelancer in that field. So, you know, being a conservator, gone frame maker or something, that's going to be hugely valuable, and that's going to be something that you really need to, you know, tell people, and like, because that's going to be your selling point. So whilst I don't think the sector has loads of jobs just in general, I feel like that's a valid path to take, you know, to go into an adjacent field and then make the most of what kind of training and background you have. I think that's totally a thing. I don't know if that helps or hinders, but best of luck, Stuart.
Good luck.
Hope you're still listening. Patreon shout out. We've got quite a few new patrons. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Shout out to Natalie Karras, Luke Addington, She Who Must Not Be Named, Roisin Byrne, and Museum Archipelago, a fellow podcast, for becoming our patrons on Patreon.
Welcome.
You so
thank
much.
you.
Yeah, thanks so much. If you fancy supporting our work, you can go to patreon.com/thecword. Thanks very much. That's how we stay on air. Thanks for listening. We're The C Word, and you've been listening to Jenny van Enckevort, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasson. Join us next time for an episode about professional bodies. In the meantime, you can check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at thecwordpodcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Missick, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production. Oh yeah! Season 3. Season 3. Season 3. Season 3. Oh yeah.
Year 2.
Oh yeah.
Year 2.
Oh yeah.
Year 2.